When Clint Eastwood stepped onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage that night, he didn't come to sell a movie. He came carrying a lifetime of unfiltered American grit. What started as a friendly interview quickly cracked open into a live confrontation about freedom, truth, and the price of keeping quiet. Within minutes, the room shifted. Laughter turned uneasy, smiles froze, and late-night television became a battlefield. This wasn't about a movie or even a chair. It was about something bigger, who still has the guts to speak, and who actually deserves a seat at the table. Clint Eastwood walked into the studio. The air didn't move. People stopped talking, pretending to be busy. It wasn't fear exactly. It was awareness. The kind that says, "Don't screw this up." Clint didn't say a word. He just scanned the room like a man checking. He sat down in a cold steel-backed chair. His hand tapped the armrest twice. Light, steady, deliberate. "Cold chair," he muttered. Maggie, standing nearby, caught it. "Cold like the people sitting across from me," he added without looking up. Maggie had been with him for years, long enough to know that when he got quiet, he wasn't calm. He was calculating. A young producer in a headset walked too close, smiling like it might break the ice. Maggie stopped him with a look sharp enough to cut. "Don't try to be cute," she warned. "Don't cue jokes. Don't chase a viral moment. If you corner him, he'll bite." The kid blinked, half laughed, then realized she wasn't kidding and backed away. Clint kept staring at a piece of paper on the table, a short list of topics to avoid. He read it once, then folded it neatly and slipped it into his jacket pocket like a loaded bullet. Outside, the sound of the studio band rumbled like distant thunder. Maggie checked her watch. 7 minutes to showtime. She moved closer, speaking low. "They're going to test you tonight," she said. Clint nodded once. "They always do." The lights hit hard when Clint stepped onto the stage. The crowd clapped, cheered, shouted his name. Jimmy Kimmel, always quick with a grin, stood up to greet him. "Ladies and gentlemen, the legend himself." The applause swelled. The band hit a brassy riff, and for a moment everything felt smooth. Just another late-night show. Clint shook Jimmy's hand, nodded once, and sat down. The energy didn't dip exactly. It shifted. The laughter that filled the room a second ago seemed to hang in the air, waiting for something. Jimmy launched into his usual rhythm, cracking a few warm-up jokes. But Clint didn't play along. He just sat there, quiet, his eyes steady. The stillness spread through the studio like cold air. Jimmy tried again, leaning on that practiced charm. "You know, Clint, when I heard you were coming, I figured we should roll out the red carpet. Or maybe a little dirt road, huh?" The audience laughed politely. Jimmy smirked, sensing a good groove, then tossed another line. "Heard you brought a little bit of the Wild West to Hollywood tonight." Clint's head turned slowly toward him. His voice was calm, even polite, but it sliced through the laughter like glass. "No," he said. "I brought something Hollywood's been missing." A pause. Dignity. The laughter died before it could even start again. You could hear the camera rig hum. Jimmy blinked, his smile faltering for just a second. "Well," he said, chuckling awkwardly, "guess I walked right into that one." Clint didn't smile back. He just leaned back in his chair, hands resting lightly on his knees, as if he'd already said everything that mattered. Jimmy glanced toward the band, then back at Clint, realizing for the first time that this wasn't going to be an easy night. From the wings, Maggie watched closely. She'd seen that look before. Clint's jaw tightening just enough to warn her he was ready for a fight if someone pushed too hard. Jimmy straightened his cue cards, tried to keep his tone light. "So, let's talk about the movie." Jimmy shuffled his cards, trying to reset the mood. He leaned in, voice light, all charm. "So, Clint, your new movie, The Ranch, a story about a man protecting his land, standing his ground. Sounds familiar." The crowd laughed softly, the kind of laugh people give when they're not sure if it's supposed to be funny. Clint nodded once, eyes steady on Jimmy. "Yeah," he said. "It's about knowing when to stop backing up." The answer was short, dry, and went nowhere near the setup Jimmy had hoped for. The host smiled wider, pushing through the awkward pause. "I mean, come on, that's classic you. The cowboy spirit, the quiet strength. You still ride horses in the morning? Clint looked at him. Sometimes, he said. They don't talk as much as people do. A few laughs flickered, then vanished. Jimmy chuckled, tapping his pen against the desk. Guess that's your secret, huh? Less talk, more stare. He waited for a laugh that never came. Clint just watched him, still and calm, until Jimmy started to shift in his chair. Then Clint spoke, slow, measured, but sharp enough to cut through the room. You ask a lot of questions, he said, like a man afraid of hearing a real answer. The air snapped. The crowd went quiet. Jimmy froze mid-smile, unsure if it was a joke or a jab. Clint didn't blink. He just leaned back, that quiet half-smirk flickering for half a second before disappearing again. From the side of the stage, Maggie stopped breathing. She'd seen this look before. The calm before the break, the part where Clint stopped playing along. Jimmy's laughter came out a beat too late. Ha! Well, I guess I deserve that, he said, forcing a grin. But his voice cracked just a little on the last word. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the tension without understanding why. Clint adjusted his cuff, eyes never leaving Jimmy. Don't worry, he said, voice low, almost kind. You'll get your answers. Might not be the ones you want. Maggie exhaled slowly, arms crossed tight against her chest. The storm had started, not with yelling, not with anger, but with that one simple line. The laughter came before the clip even started. Light, rehearsed, harmless. Jimmy smiled wide, selling the setup. Now come on, Clint. We all remember this one, he said, gesturing to the screen. 2012, the big convention, the empty chair, classic moment. The audience chuckled louder, happy to be in on the joke. But Clint didn't even glance at the screen. His eyes stayed fixed on Jimmy, calm but heavy, like a storm that hadn't broken yet. The clip rolled. Younger Clint on stage, talking to that empty seat, his voice rough, defiant. The laughter grew again, scattered and uneasy. Then Clint spoke, quiet enough that only the front row heard it at first. That sounds like people laughing at things they never had the guts to stand up for. The laughter stopped cold. The silence after hit harder than the joke ever did. Jimmy froze mid-smile, eyes darting toward the control booth like someone had just pulled the wrong lever. Hey, he said lightly, trying to pull the room back. It's all good fun. We're just messing around here. Clint tilted his head slightly, voice calm but cutting. You think truth's a toy, Jimmy? You toss it around for laughs, then wonder why nobody believes you anymore. The crowd tensed. Someone coughed. No one laughed. Jimmy forced a chuckle, trying to look relaxed. Come on, it's history, man. It's just part of the show. Clint leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low and steady. History's not a punchline. It's what's left when the laughter fades. The room was dead silent now. Maggie, watching from the wings, felt her stomach drop. This was the tone she'd warned them about. Not rage, not performance. Precision. The kind of quiet that cut deeper than shouting ever could. Jimmy cleared his throat, glancing at his cards for cover. Look, I get it. You were making a statement back then. People took it different ways. Clint didn't blink. People always do when they don't like the reflection. Jimmy tried to laugh again, but Clint kept going, voice harder now. That chair wasn't empty, it was waiting. Waiting for someone who used to care what the hell happened to this country. Waiting for people who didn't need applause to tell the truth. The audience murmured, some agreeing, others squirming in their seats. Jimmy shot back, half joking, half defensive. Well, maybe the chair got tired of waiting. Clint looked at him, that same slow, deliberate stare that made decades of actors crumble. No, he said quietly. It didn't get tired. It got replaced. With talk shows and sound bites, he nodded toward Jimmy's desk. You've got the new chair right there. The crowd gasped, half stunned, half thrilled. Jimmy's smile cracked for real this time. Okay, he said, tapping the desk with a tight laugh. Guess we're doing this. Clint didn't move. You brought it up. You thought it was a joke. It never was. He leaned back, the studio lights catching the edge of his face. Calm, sharp, unshaken. That chair was for the people no one listens to anymore. You laugh because it's safer than realizing you're part of the reason they're still waiting. The audience didn't know what to do. Clap, boo, or just sit in the tension. Even the band stayed frozen, unsure whether to cue the break or the national anthem. Jimmy opened his mouth to steer it back, but no words came. Clint looked right at him and added almost kindly, "Don't worry, son. Every show needs its ghost." Maggie closed her eyes for half a second. The storm had broken, and no one, not Jimmy, not the producers, not the crowd, could stop it now. Jimmy adjusted his tie, forcing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. The room was thick with silence, and he could feel the producers breathing down his neck through the earpiece. He decided to take the risk anyway. "You talk a lot about truth, Clint," he said, his tone too casual to hide the edge beneath it. "But when the country hit the streets, George Floyd, protests, the chaos, people were asking where you were. You've always stood for justice, for speaking out. Why stay quiet?" The crowd shifted, a nervous energy spreading across the studio. Clint didn't move. He stared at Jimmy for a long second, long enough for the air to turn heavy. Then, with a voice so calm it felt dangerous, he said, "Silence isn't weakness, Jimmy. It's what a man chooses when he's deciding whether his shout will wake the deaf or just join the noise." A few people in the crowd murmured. Jimmy leaned in, still pretending to smile, though his voice cracked a little. "So you're saying silence is noble now?" Clint blinked slowly, like a man trying to decide if the question was worth answering. "No," he said. "I'm saying the world's so loud with fake virtue that a whisper of truth gets buried before it's even spoken." The audience was frozen. Jimmy looked at his cue cards, laughed lightly. "You sound like you're blaming the people trying to change things." Clint's head tilted. "I'm blaming the people pretending they are." His words landed like a slap. Not shouted, just sharp. Half the folks holding signs didn't even read what was written on them. They just wanted to be seen doing it. The laughter was gone. The cameras caught Jimmy's hand tightening around his pen. "That's a harsh take," he said, voice quieter. "People would say you're out of touch." Clint's answer came fast, steady. "Out of touch with what? The performance? The hashtags? I'm fine being out of touch with fake outrage." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "You want to know where I was during the noise? I was standing where the crowd stopped listening, where everyone was yelling and no one gave a damn about hearing the truth." Jimmy tried to laugh, but the sound cracked halfway through. "You know, Clint, people expect you to stand for something." Clint's gaze didn't waver. "I do. I stand for the things that don't need an audience." The room felt smaller now, the air hotter under the studio lights. Jimmy tried to steer back, his tone sharper. "So, what, you're against protest?" Clint's voice dropped even lower. "I'm against people who chant justice at noon and forget about it by dinner." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Shock, awe, discomfort. "You want to talk about standing up?" Clint continued. "You stand when no one's watching. You fight when there's nothing to gain. You keep your mouth shut when talking feels easy." Jimmy looked lost for a beat, then forced a smirk. "Guess you still got that cowboy fire in you." Clint's eyes narrowed just slightly. "No," he said, "just a memory of when men didn't need applause to be brave." Maggie stood frozen backstage, watching the air vibrate with tension. Jimmy tried one more jab, the kind that worked on everyone else. "You realize this kind of talk might not play well online, right?" Clint turned his head toward the camera, his face half in shadow. "Good," he said flatly. "The truth shouldn't trend." That line hit like thunder. The audience didn't move, didn't breathe. Even Jimmy's practiced grin fell away for good. Clint sat back, still calm, still controlled. A man who hadn't raised his voice once, but somehow managed to shake the whole damn room. For a long moment, no one breathed. The crowd sat frozen, unsure if what was happening was still part of the show. Jimmy shuffled his cue cards, forcing a smile that looked painted on. All right, he said with a nervous laugh. "Let's keep it light. It's just TV, man. People came here to have fun." Clint's jaw tightened. He stood up slowly, every motion deliberate, as if he was about to face down a firing squad. The cameras followed him automatically, operators too stunned to cut away. Jimmy blinked, Clint, buddy, we're still rolling, he said, laughing again, but the sound cracked halfway through. Clint turned his head toward the glowing lights and the millions of unseen faces beyond them. His voice came out low and steady, the kind that carried more power than a shout ever could. That chair, he said, pointing at the seat beside Jimmy's desk, isn't empty. It's a mirror. And every time you call this just TV, it reflects the cowardice of a media too scared to tell the truth. The words hit like thunder. The audience erupted, some cheering, others booing, the sound splitting down the middle. Jimmy raised both hands, laughing awkwardly, trying to keep control. Hey, come on, we're just a talk show. We make jokes, we lighten things up. Don't take it so seriously, Clint looked at him with the calm of a man who'd already heard every excuse. You sell cheap laughs for ratings and call it entertainment, he said. You trade conscience for applause. You don't lighten things up, Jimmy. You make them hollow. The crowd gasped. Maggie, watching from backstage, gripped her headset so tight her knuckles went white. Jimmy tried again, voice cracking now. We're here to make people happy, Clint. Clint stepped closer to the desk. No, you're here to make them forget they're unhappy. That's not the same thing. The audience began to stir again, half rising from their seats, half shouting over one another. Jimmy tried to laugh, his nerves showing. You're gonna get me canceled, man, he said, pretending to joke. Clint didn't flinch. You can't cancel what doesn't need permission to speak, he said flatly. You can only expose it. He turned his gaze toward the crowd, his voice growing sharper. You want to know what's really killing this country? It's not politics. It's the fact that truth has to compete with punchlines. He pointed at the camera now, his stare locked on the lens. And you, he said, his voice rising for the first time, you dress lies in laughter so people won't feel guilty watching them. The studio fell into stunned silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights above. Jimmy tried to recover, his voice shaky. Okay, he said. So you don't like late-night comedy. That's fine. Maybe we'll do a cowboy-themed segment next time, huh? Clint turned to him slowly, his tone turning cold as steel. You think this is about jokes? You think it's about comedy? He stepped closer, his shadow falling across the desk. You stand behind that desk and smile while the world burns outside. You call it content. You turn suffering into monologues and truth into hashtags. And when someone actually says something real, you hide behind the word entertainment. Jimmy's smile finally broke. We're doing our best, he said quietly. Clint didn't hesitate. Your best isn't the truth. It's the safest version of it you can sell. The crowd exploded again, shouting, clapping, some standing, some yelling for security, others yelling, "Let him speak!" The camera feed shook as operators fought to keep focus. Maggie stepped closer to the stage, whispering under her breath, "Oh God, he's really doing it." Clint looked around the studio one last time, then leaned forward over Jimmy's desk. You think this chair is a prop? He said, his voice deep and slow. But it's the only honest thing in the room. It's been empty for years because nobody in this business has had the guts to sit in it and listen. He straightened up, eyes locked on Jimmy. You asked me to talk about my movie. Here's the story. A man stands his ground until the ground moves under him. And when it does, he doesn't run. He makes the world remember where the line used to be. The audience was in chaos now. People cheering, others booing, camera flashes popping like lightning. Jimmy tried to speak, but no words came. Clint gave him one last look and said softly, That's your problem, Jimmy. You think silence means peace, but sometimes silence means the truth just got tired of waiting for someone brave enough to speak it. Then without another word, he turned toward the crowd, the lights hitting him full in the face, and walked off stage. The cameras stayed rolling, catching every second of it. The stunned host, the roaring audience, the empty chair glowing under the spotlight. And in that moment, every person watching at home knew the show had ended long before the credits rolled. The studio didn't feel like a studio anymore. It felt like a crater. Something massive had hit, and everyone was still trying to figure out what was left standing. Clint was gone, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hallway. The crowd didn't know whether to clap, boo, or just sit there in stunned silence. Jimmy stayed frozen beside his desk, one hand on his notes, the other hanging limp by his side. He looked at the chair next to him, the one Clint had pointed at. One of its legs had cracked clean through, a jagged splinter showing under the hot lights. It wasn't broken by force, it just gave out, like the room itself had buckled under the weight of what had been said. Jimmy's jaw clenched. For once, the king of late night didn't have a punchline. Backstage, Maggie followed Clint down the corridor, her heels clicking behind his steady stride. She didn't say a word, and neither did he. The noise of the studio, shouts, applause, chaos, was fading behind them like a dying storm. They reached the side exit. Clint pushed open the door, the cool night air hitting him in the face. He stopped for a moment, breathing it in. Maggie caught up, but still didn't speak. She didn't have to. He'd said everything that needed to be said. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy, honest. Inside the control room, panic and adrenaline collided. Nate stood in front of the monitors, eyes wide, replaying the footage on a loop. Clint pointing at the chair, the crowd erupting, the feed cutting to black too late. His voice shook with a mix of awe and disbelief. "We're trending everywhere," he said. "Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. Holy hell, we've got millions watching already." Reed stood beside him, expression flat, arms crossed. He didn't look impressed. He didn't even look surprised. He just stared at the screen. "You wanted viral?" he said quietly. "Congratulations, kid. You got it." Nate turned toward him, unsure if it was praise or a warning. Reed didn't clarify. He just kept watching the frozen frame of Clint's empty chair under the stage lights. "But you better pray the network survives it." Jimmy finally snapped out of his trance and walked off stage, the crowd parting around him like water. The applause sign blinked uselessly above the audience. No one was laughing, no one was clapping. They were whispering, recording, posting. Jimmy stopped halfway down the steps and looked back at the chair again. The broken leg glinted under the light. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Guess the ratings are safe," he muttered, then disappeared behind the curtain. Outside, the night was calm, the kind of stillness that only comes after a storm. Clint walked toward the waiting black SUV, his shadow long under the streetlights. The studio's glow flickered behind him, reflected faintly in the wet pavement. The glass windows still buzzed with light and noise, but out here, it was quiet. The reflection of the building shimmered across the car door like fire. Maggie caught up and stood beside him. For a moment, neither moved. Then she said softly, "You just split the country in half." Clint turned his head, meeting her eyes. "No," he said, his voice calm, grounded. "I just held up the mirror they've been avoiding." Maggie nodded, looking back toward the studio as Clint got into the car. Through the tinted window, the red on-air sign still glowed like an ember refusing to die. She closed the door and the sound echoed through the alley like punctuation. Sharp, final. The SUV pulled away slowly, the headlights cutting through the night. In the rearview mirror, the studio lights reflected off the glass, flickering like a fire behind them. Something burning, something changing. Inside, the crew was still trying to make sense of it. Reed sat alone in the control room, the other producers gone, the monitors looping the same moment again and again. Clint standing, pointing, the words echoing through the speakers. "It's not empty. It's a mirror," Reed sighed, rubbing his temples. "Hell of a mirror," he murmured. On the stage, the chair still sat under the spotlight, one leg cracked, one shadow stretching long behind it. The audience was gone, the cameras off, but the air still carried the charge of what had just happened. The light flickered once, then steadied, bathing the chair in gold. It wasn't just a prop anymore. It was a scar, a symbol, a reminder. Not of politics, not of sides, but of truth and the cost of saying it out loud. And as the studio lights dimmed one by one, that cracked chair remained in the center of the stage, glowing in the dark. No longer empty, but waiting for someone brave enough to sit down and listen. Don't just watch. Be part of the conversation. If this moment hits you, if it made you question what's real and what's just for show, tell us what you think in the comments below. Do you stand with Clint or with the screen that tried to silence him? And if you want more raw, unfiltered moments like this, where Hollywood's mask slips and the truth takes the spotlight. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us for the next chapter of Hollywood Unmasked. The story isn't over, it's just getting louder.